So you're watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages of the morning papers. In the next half hour, we'll see what's making the headlines with the royal commentator, Victoria Murphy, and the writer and royal photographer, Ian Lloyd. Lovely to have you both with us. So let's see then what is on some of those front pages. The Sunday Telegraph leading with the funeral of the Duke of Edinburgh, which has taken place in Windsor. The Sunday Times has a wraparound front page displaying an image of the service in St George's Chapel. The headline inside the paper reads, "Forced to mourn alone, the Queen bids Philip goodbye." The Mirror also holds a similar headline with the loneliest goodbye. A headline of support from the Sunday Express reading, "You're not alone, ma'am," and pictures Her Majesty sitting alone at Prince Philip's funeral. The Star also carrying that image. Bless her, they say. The Daily Mail looks into the inside story of how the Duchess of Cambridge helped to mend the relationship between Prince William and Prince Harry. The Observer, meanwhile, leading with a warning to the Prime Minister, suggesting the Conservatives will lose the trust of Red Wall voters if he fails to take action on the Greensill lobbying row. But again, pictures Her Majesty. So let's get the thoughts, the choices then of Victoria Murphy and Ian Lloyd. And Victoria, what an emotional and poignant set of front pages they are.
Absolutely, incredibly fitting for the occasion today. And I don't think it's any surprise at all that so many of the front pages feature that photograph of the Queen sitting on her own in the chapel choir with those huge expanse of pews next to her, isolated and alone without her husband of more than 70 years by her side. And I think when we all saw that picture earlier on today, taken by a Press Association photographer, it was very clear that that was a very iconic image. You know, it really sums up the situation that she is now in, but it's also a very iconic, I think, photograph for our times. You know, we have that picture because this was a funeral that took place in COVID times, and she is sitting alone because of social distancing and wearing a mask. It's not a photograph we could ever have seen at a royal funeral 2 years ago, and hopefully not one we will ever see again. So incredibly iconic. I think a challenge for the papers, because obviously it's a landscape picture and the newspapers are in portrait. And I think, you know, actually the Mirror has done a very good job of sort of creating that expansive feel and the feeling of her being isolated.
Yes, let's take a look at the Mirror then. The loneliest goodbye, they say. But Ian, what are your thoughts about the Duke of Edinburgh, how he would have felt about today, despite those images? You followed him, for more than 500 royal engagements, many of his carriage driving competitions, as well as several state visits. Would he have liked it? No fuss, pared down?
Absolutely. I mean, yes, I think he would have thought it was terrific because, I mean, even before COVID, his funeral was going to be much more different from Diana's or the Queen Mother's. It wasn't going to be a lavish state ceremony. There was going to be no lying in state in London, no parade from Westminster to Paddington, then a train to Windsor and all of that. It was all going to be centred around Windsor. I think the only thing we might have had was a pageantry down the Long Walk, a bit of a sort of a walk down there, if you like, and for the public to see. But apart from that, that would have been it, really. So obviously he wouldn't have expected the COVID restriction, but I think the very fact that you didn't get ambassadors there, politicians, Lord Mayors and everything would have delighted him, to be honest. I think sometimes he got rather cross. I know he used to call, when there was a posse of mayors turning up, he used to say, "Oh, here's the chain gang again." So I think he would have been quite happy not to have had all of those people there.
That's interesting, isn't it? And as we look here at the family, obviously in mourning suits, Victoria, would you have minded, though, the loss of the uniforms, do you think? A decision that the Queen took in order, presumably, to spare Prince Harry's blushes?
Yeah, I mean, much discussion about that before the funeral when it was announced that that was going to happen. But actually today, it really wasn't the focus at all. I certainly don't think he would have minded. I think he would have very much understood the decision and the reasons behind it. I think also what we sort of saw with this funeral, because it was so pared back, it actually became very much a family funeral. So the fact that they weren't in that military uniform, I think, didn't seem as at odds. We didn't have the scale of military spectacle that we would have had in normal times. I think another very powerful sort of visual of the day, obviously his coffin with his Royal Standard flag, representing his position, but also on top of that, his naval cap and sword. And I think the Telegraph chose to put a picture showing that on their front page. And I think really a really quite powerful visual of a reminder really of the military career that he had in the Royal Navy before the Queen became Queen and he stepped back from that military position. And it was a sacrifice that he made because he understood that when he married her, he had a different kind of duty to do, and he completely had signed up to that. And I think sort of seeing that cap on top of the coffin today, I think evoked images of him as a young naval officer that we've seen so many pictures of him in that role recently. So very fitting, I think, that was shown.
Yes, the Sunday Telegraph, as you said, with a really dramatic photograph there, the sword given by the Queen's father as well. So all of these things hark back to this really long association he's had with the royal family. He's known the Queen, Ian, for 80 years, married for 73 of them. Much of the focus of the newspapers, not surprised, on Her Majesty the Queen. And as you have followed those engagements that they've held together, how will she, do you think, cope without him?
Well, I think obviously the Queen's got duty ingrained in her. I mean, I think she's almost enjoyed her role over the years. And I think things like her executive role of the red boxes that she goes through each day, I think she copes very well with those. And I once asked her cousin, Margaret Rhodes, how the Queen copes with pressure. And she said, well, she's got the ability to compartmentalise her life. So she, if tomorrow she's going to open Parliament, she doesn't think about it at that moment. There could be something else to occupy her mind, and she will give that her full attention and then think, well, tomorrow I'll concentrate on the other thing. So she has that ability. And then, of course, she's got other things like the family. The several members, Prince Andrew and Prince Edward, are nearby in Windsor. Then there's a bubble, people like Angela Kelly and her dresser, Angela Kelly, and her page, Paul Wybrew, people like that live alongside her. And now 2 extra corgis, which she's corgi puppies, which she's going to be occupied walking. So I suppose there's going to be a few, diversions.
Yes, exactly. The new dogs, as the papers described in the last few days. The lady in waiting, of course, who accompanied her today, Baroness Hussey, part of this ensemble of people who are still around her, been part of HMS Bubble. Victoria, do you think, this idea, you'll never walk alone, already some of the grandchildren have done engagements with her. How will the family be rallying around, do you think, supporting Her Majesty as she goes on? I mean, her birthday only next week. Will she feel their full support despite the difficulties of COVID?
I think absolutely, and I think we've really seen that. We've seen members of the royal family pay visits to her. Sophie, Countess of Wessex, said, the Queen's been amazing, and I think we're absolutely going to see them support her. I mean, they have been doing so already. Prince Philip, remember, retired in 2017, so he has been missing from public life for a few years, although, of course, it is sort of particularly poignant now to see her photographed on her own, because even though we've seen her on her own in public life before, now we sort of know that when she goes home, she'll still be on her own, and there is something, I think, more poignant about that. But I certainly think we will see the family support her. I mean, we're not in normal times at the moment, so engagements are not being carried out, so it's very hard to get a sense of how things will look when things do hopefully go back to normal and engagements resume at the same level. But I certainly think we will see her attending events with family members. I think we will still see her carry out audiences and do duties on her own in the way that she has been.
Yes, and maybe more of those, virtual Zoom-type meetings, which she's become used to. The Times front page, their wraparound, shows the drama of the occasion, really, doesn't it, with some 700 military personnel taking part. But I'm just going to read Alison Pearson's words in the Telegraph. It was a heartbreakingly beautiful day, almost too glorious for a funeral. But the spring sunshine in which Windsor Castle was bathed felt true to the remarkable warmth, love even, which the nation felt for the dearly departed. And I return, Ian, to that thought that for many people watching at home, some of whom may have had the privilege of meeting Prince Philip, it was really a dramatic but emotional day for them.
Certainly dramatic, yes. And actually the Sunday Times photographs do show the drama, because I think the last big occasion we remember was the wedding of Prince Harry and Meghan Markle, where Meghan was walking down with the aisle with all the people on either side of her, and then this striking image of the funeral procession with, of course, nobody around it, looking very stark, and the same outside. Normally we're used to, bride, groom, attendants and so on. It's a very minimalist sort of shot. And it does remind us also of Prince Philip's great involvement with St George's Chapel. He was actually quite a religious person. He had over 630 books on religion in his library, and he was a practicing Christian. I mean, he attended church quite often. And as we said today, I mean, he was so often there over the last 70 years alongside the Queen. So it's very poignant for him not to be sitting alongside her today.
Well, stark, minimalist, no fuss, just as he would have wanted, perhaps.